gotta make diesel noises when you're climbing.
Located at the top and to the right, or left, depending on which way you're facing, of the Sandy Ridge Trail system, Follow the Leader is a trail everyone rides once when they're not ready for it, and then never rides it again. Never riding this a second time is a huge mistake. The reason you hated this trail the first time you rode it is that you haven't ridden in Moab, Northern Washington, or Canada yet. More on that later. This trail is important to ride because the forest it travels through is pretty darn neat. It's not quite like the other forest in the rest of the Sandy Ridge Trail system, and the terrain is not quite like the terrain in the rest of the Sandy Ridge Trail system. So, come here for the trees and stay for the rock rolls. Get to this trail by riding the paved road up to the kiosk. Ride past the kiosk and find the trailhead on your right. Follow the Leader starts as a side cut meandering up and down on a peninsula of land framed by a hairpin turn and homestead road that sort of climbs, then descends, then climbs and descends for the first 3/4 of a mile. If you're already tired from the road climb and you were expecting a nice downhill reward, you're going to be really mad at this first 3/4 of a mile because it's pretty challenging. The trail is listed as a double black for a reason. You're going to have to ride with some coordination in here, and that's just the way it is. The bench is reasonably wide, but the surface of the trail is rocks and duff. Think of it like eating an oatmeal cookie with shards of walnut shells in it. There are a lot of rocks with pedal strikes on them throughout this section. Anyway, I hope your dropper post is in good working order. You're going to need it.
This is following the #1 rule of Sandy Ridge. No downhill is a downhill.
It's true. On the upper half of Sandy Ridge, every descent has climbing. This is no exception. Anyway, you'll do a lot of pedaling and descending on this undulating side hill, traverse a challenging rock garden that's sort of uphill, downhill, like all the rock gardens at Sandy Ridge, cross a creek, and then do a little more climbing and then arrive here, where the descent begins, at a super challenging rock roll.
I mean, it's like you're waiting for an easy descent all the way up, and then here it is.
And this right here is why you absolutely hated this trail the first time you rode it. There are a few factors conspiring here to ruin your initial experience, and none of them are really anyone's fault. The first one is that Sandy Ridge is well designed for progression, meaning that everyone from beginner to expert can find something to ride here. So, if you're like me, here's what happened the first time you rode this trail. You were probably an intermediate level rider on something more akin to an intermediate level bike. Some sort of 120mm front and back full suspension thing with a relatively steep head angle. You saw this trail entrance and, not knowing what this trail was or having ever seen something this technical before, you thought you'd ride it. You'd never ridden rock rolls before. You encountered this super technical trail and it totally freaked you out. It left you shook, and nursing that memory, you never came back. Your only interaction with this trail was colored by anger and terror, and those are difficult emotions to overcome. So, there you go. Circumstances conspired to get you onto a trail you weren't ready for, and it freaked you out. Nobody's fault. Not yours, not the trail builders. It just happened. That's life. Here's where Canada, Northern Washington, and Moab are relevant to this discussion. The Cascade Mountains in Oregon and Southwest Washington are all volcanic. That means all the rock is basalt. Basalt is horrible for rock rolls. It's not the kind of rock you want to learn this skill on because it's unpredictable. It's slippery and it breaks at sharp angles, meaning you can't trust that you won't pedal strike halfway down a steep roll. Also, basalt just gets worse as it degrades. The Northern Cascades in Canada and Northern Washington, on the other hand, are made out of nice, grippy granite that erodes into nice smooth faces and breaks cleanly and evenly, meaning even stuff that looks relatively impossible to ride is in fact totally rideable. Moab is sandstone, which is even more supernaturally grippy and rather than breaking tends to be eroded smoothly by wind into nice round shapes that accommodate bike tires well. The result is that in both places you can ride steeper grades with more confidence, which gets you used to how the bike feels on steep pitches. So you really need to ride at either Whistler or Moab first to get good at steep pitches before you try to ride that kind of terrain here on sketchy basalt that isn't as forgiving to someone learning how to do this. So there you go. While this isn't technically any more technical than the techie trails in other areas, it requires a bit more skill because of the rocks it's built from. So go practice at Whistler or Moab or Tiger Mountain or Spokane and then come back here and try it again.
Yeah, you're just like, if you're Whistler and you're doing this all the time, you're like, whatevs.
After all the rock rolls, the trail sort of hits this super flowy but rocky and pumpy section of what I can only describe as technical flow. It's what you wish the top section had been before hitting all that techie stuff. It's like this trail is inverted from what you'd want it to be, but hey, the terrain dictates the building you can do, not our desires. After around a quarter mile of this flowy but rocky awesomeness, the bench traverses this fairly long rock garden through an old landslide. Fortunately, it's easy to hold speed into this rock garden, but then it just sort of goes on forever. It's about 3 times as long as you'd expect it to be. But if you take advantage of every possible pedal stroke in here, you'll do just fine. See if you can clear the whole thing without a dab. The standard Sandy Ridge rules for rock gardens do apply here. It definitely undulates.
Uphill rock garden! Downhill rock garden! This is a cool rock garden.
After the rock garden, there's about 1,000 linear feet of sort of duffy trail, and then you're at this intersection, where you can turn right to get back onto the road or go straight ahead to the top of Flow Motion. In my previous review for Sandy Ridge, I called this trail pure torture. I now recant that statement. After 5 years of improvement and riding it on a proper bike, I had a lot of fun on this trail. It's super challenging techie goodness, and it's nice to know that something like this exists in a sanctioned trail system around here. It's spicy. Please remember to hit like if you liked this, dislike if you didn't, and subscribe. Interaction helps other riders find these videos. Now, get out there and go ride your bike.